She stepped off that stagecoach into a blinding blizzard, 2,000 miles from everything she knew, to marry a man she had never seen. He stood waiting in the freezing cold, a lonely widower carrying the ghosts of a wife and daughter he could not save. Two strangers, two broken hearts, one desperate gamble. But what happened next would prove that sometimes the greatest love stories do not begin with romance. They begin with courage, they begin with faith, and they begin with 5 simple words that would change everything. I have been waiting in the cold for you. This story reminds us that love is not something you fall into by accident. It is something you build, choice by choice, day by day. Grace and Owen teach us that broken people can heal each other, that arranged beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings, and that taking a leap of faith, even when you're terrified, can lead you straight to the life you were always meant to live. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and tell me, would you have had the courage to get on that stagecoach? Drop a like if you believe in second chances, share this with someone who needs to hear that love can find you in the most unexpected places, and subscribe so you never miss another story that reminds you what the human heart is truly capable of. The stagecoach bucked to a halt right in front of the general store. The sudden stop almost sent Grace Anderson tumbling from her seat. A fierce blizzard was tearing through Hecla, a little settlement in Montana. It was the kind of whiteout that made even tough old miners start praying. Grace hugged her travel bag, squinting through a window glazed with ice. All she could see was a wall of swirling snow. She had journeyed 2,000 miles from Boston, all to marry a man she had never laid eyes on. Now, in the final moments before they met, time itself seemed frozen. The driver hollered something, but the wind snatched the words away. Still, she got the message. This was it. Her fingers shook as she secured the top button of her wool coat. Back in Massachusetts, the coat had felt warm enough. But here, in the Montana Territory, in January of 1878, it might as well have been made of paper. Grace took a deep breath to steady her nerves, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped out into snow that came right up to her knees. The wind slammed into her, stealing the air from her lungs and ripping her bonnet from her head. Just before she could fall, a pair of strong hands grabbed her elbow. "Miss Anderson." The voice was deep and calm, cutting right through the storm's noise with a quiet strength. Grace looked up into a face that was weathered by the elements, with eyes as blue as a summer sky. They looked impossibly bright against his tanned skin. Snow was already piling up on his hat brim and the shoulders of his thick coat. He was taller than she'd pictured and built solid. His very presence made the whole terrifying situation feel a little more manageable. "I am Grace Anderson," she said, her teeth already chattering. "Owen Ellis." He gave a slight nod, touching the brim of his hat. "I have been waiting out here in the cold for you." He did not say it like an accusation. It was just a simple fact, a quiet statement of what he had been willing to do. His hand stayed on her elbow, holding her steady against the wind. "I am so sorry," Grace told him. "The train was late in Chicago, and then again in... Come on inside before you freeze solid." Owen took her bag in one hand, but kept his other arm securely around her. "We can talk where it is warm." He led her away from the general store and toward a small building right next to it. It was a simple place, with a warm, golden lamplight glowing in the windows. Grace struggled through the deep snow. Her skirts felt heavier with every step as they soaked up the wetness. By the time Owen opened the door, she had lost all feeling in her feet. The wave of warmth that greeted her felt like a miracle. A pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated a powerful heat. The room looked like an office and a home combined. A desk by the window was covered in papers, and a simple bed was against the far wall. Everything was tidy and organized, and very clearly a man's space. "Sit here." Owen guided a chair closer to the stove. "I will get some coffee going." Grace collapsed into the chair, her legs suddenly feeling weak. She watched him move with a smooth competence. He stoked the fire, filled an old coffee pot from a water pitcher, and measured out the grounds like he had done it 1,000 times. Every move he made was efficient and sure, the motions of a man who was used to looking after himself. "You are the sheriff," Grace said, finally seeing the star pinned to his vest, hidden under his coat. "Town marshal," Owen corrected her. "It is not exactly the same, but the work is similar." "Did my letters not say so?" "They did," Grace admitted, feeling a flush of heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the stove. "I am sorry. I am not normally this confused. The trip has just been much longer than I anticipated." Owen took off his coat, hung it on a hook, and properly faced her for the first time. He was younger than she expected, maybe 28 or 29, with dark brown hair that curled just a bit at his collar. He had a rugged kind of handsomeness, with a strong jaw and clear features. But it was his eyes that truly held her gaze. They were filled with a quiet kindness that made a tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. No reason to apologize. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and passed one to her. "You came a very long way. That required a lot of courage." Grace cupped the mug with both hands, trying to absorb its warmth. Or desperation. The word just tumbled out, and she immediately wished she could pull it back. But Owen simply gave a slow nod and settled into the chair across from her. "I reckon we are both a little desperate in our own ways," he said softly. "Otherwise, neither of us would be here right now." His frankness was a surprise. In his letters, Owen had been polite but distant. He wrote about practical things like what he earned and where he lived, but he never revealed much about himself. This straightforward admission about their shared predicament felt like a gift. "I should be honest with you," Grace said, putting her cup down. "I might not be exactly what you were expecting. None of us ever are." Owen leaned back in his chair, looking at her with those steady blue eyes. "I am not looking for perfection, Miss Anderson. I am just hoping for a partner." "Please call me Grace." "Grace," he said, as if testing the sound of her name. "And you had better call me Owen." Outside, the wind howled even louder, making the windows rattle. Grace looked over at the door, thinking of that blinding curtain of white snow. "Will we be able to make it to the church tonight?" Owen's eyes followed her gaze, and he shook his head. "Reverend Miller lives 3 miles out of town. We would freeze to death before we got halfway. This storm blew in much faster and harder than anyone thought it would." He paused for a moment, then spoke carefully. "I have a room for you at the boarding house just 2 buildings down. You can stay there. For the night, I will sleep here. We will figure out the wedding once this weather breaks." A wave of relief and disappointment washed over Grace. A part of her just wanted the wedding done with, to finally settle into her new life and stop feeling so uncertain. But another part of her was thankful for the delay, for a chance to just breathe before she tied her life to this stranger forever. "That is very kind of you," she said. "It is the practical thing to do." Owen stood up and grabbed his coat again. "But we need to go now. The boarding house is not far, but this storm is only getting worse." He was not wrong. When Owen opened the door, the wind was a raging force, driving the snow sideways with a stinging power. Grace could hardly make out the shape of the building right next to them. Owen wrapped a scarf around her face, then took her arm and held it tight, bracing her against the gale. The walk should have taken only a couple of minutes, but it felt like a lifetime of pushing through snowdrifts and fighting to keep her feet. By the time Owen was banging on the boarding house door, Grace was shaking from head to toe, with tiny icicles forming on her eyelashes. A kind-faced woman with streaks of silver in her hair opened the door, her eyes going wide. "Good heavens, Owen, get her inside!" They stumbled into the warmth, and the woman slammed the door shut against the storm. "This must be your intended. I am Mrs. Patterson. I own this place." "Grace Anderson," Grace said through chattering teeth. "You poor thing, you are frozen half to death." Mrs. Patterson took control right away, helping Grace out of her wet coat and guiding her to the stairs. "Owen, you bring her bag up to the room at the end of the hall. I will get her warmed up and get some food in her." Owen nodded and went to get the bag, while Mrs. Patterson led Grace upstairs with a gentle but firm hand. The room was small but perfectly clean. It had a proper bed with several quilts, a dresser, and a washstand. A fire was already crackling in the little fireplace. "Let us get you out of these damp clothes," Mrs. Patterson said, already working on the laces of Grace's boots. "You will catch your death." Grace's fingers were too numb to work the buttons on her dress, so Mrs. Patterson helped her, tutting softly at the cold, wet fabric. She found a flannel nightgown in the dresser, helped Grace put it on, then wrapped her in a quilt and sat her down in a chair near the fire. "Is that better?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Much better, thank you." Grace's voice was stronger now, though she was still trembling from the cold. A knock came at the door, and Owen came in with her travel bag. He kept his eyes respectfully turned away. He set the bag on the floor and started to leave right away. "I will let you get some rest." "Wait," Grace called out, standing up and holding the quilt around her. "Thank you, Owen, for everything." He stopped in the doorway. When he turned back to look at her, a hint of warmth shone in his eyes. "I am just glad you arrived safely, Grace. We will talk more in the morning." After he was gone, Mrs. Patterson brought up a tray with hot stew and fresh bread. She watched with approval as Grace ate every bite. "Owen is a good man," the older woman said, sitting in the other chair. "He came here 5 years ago, took the marshal job when no one else would have it. He really cleaned this town up." "He seems very capable," Grace replied carefully. "He is lonely, though," Mrs. Patterson said, folding her hands in her lap. "He lost his wife and child back in Kansas. I do not ask for details, but I know what grief looks like. He has been carrying that all by himself for far too long." Grace took in this new information, thinking about Owen's quiet strength and his careful politeness. She had been so caught up in her own reasons for being a mail-order bride that she had not really considered his. She now understood what sadness must have pushed him to find a wife through letters instead of finding someone nearby. "I will try my best to be a good wife to him," Grace said softly. Mrs. Patterson reached over and patted her hand. "I can see that you have had your own share of troubles, my dear. Perhaps the two of you can help each other heal." After Mrs. Patterson left, Grace lay in the soft, warm bed, listening to the storm rage outside. It was her last night as a single woman, her last night as just Grace Anderson. Tomorrow, if the weather allowed it, she would become Mrs. Owen Ellis. She would tie her life, legally and spiritually, to a man she had only just met a few hours before. She thought about the world she had left behind in Boston. Her father's passing 6 months prior had left her and her mother completely broke. They found out far too late that his business had been sinking for years, and that his debts had swallowed every last thing they owned. Her mother moved in with a sister in Philadelphia, but there was no room and certainly no money for Grace to join them. Her options were grim: either toil away in a factory or marry her father's old business partner, a man of 60 with roaming hands and a reputation for cruelty. A newspaper ad for mail-order brides felt like her only real way out, a long shot at a new life. Owen's letters were honest and to the point. He needed a wife, a partner to share his life in a small Montana town. He promised her respect, a full partnership, and his faithfulness. He never promised love, but Grace had learned a long time ago that love was a luxury she could not afford. Even so, she kept thinking about his hand, how it steadied her arm, and the kindness in his eyes that defied the bitter cold. She remembered his simple words, that he had been waiting for her. Maybe, just maybe, there were worse ways to start a marriage. The blizzard howled through the night and continued all the next day. Grace used that time to arrange the few belongings she had, and to talk with Mrs. Patterson, who turned out to be a walking encyclopedia about the town of Hecla and everyone in it. The town had sprung up around silver mines in the mountains, though the easy-to-get silver was mostly gone now. About 200 souls called the place home, a blend of miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers. Owen served as the lawman, keeping the peace, settling arguments, and now and then handling claim jumpers or drifters with sticky fingers. He is fair, but he is also firm, Mrs. Patterson noted as they sat in the warm living room watching the thick snow continue to fall outside. The men here respect that about him. He is not afraid to face down trouble, even when it would be much simpler to just look away. Grace had a feeling there was a deeper story attached to that comment, but Mrs. Patterson didn't say more, and Grace knew better than to push. She figured she would learn all about her husband's life soon enough. Owen stopped by that evening, stomping the snow off his boots in the entryway. The cold had turned his cheeks a healthy red, and a dusting of snow covered his shoulders. "Just wanted to make sure. You are settled in all right," he said, taking off his hat. "I am very comfortable, thank you," Grace replied, getting up from her chair in the parlor, very aware that Mrs. Patterson was watching with keen interest. "Would you like to come sit by the fire and warm up?" Owen paused for a moment, then gave a slight nod. He sat in the chair opposite hers, turning his hat over in his hands. For what felt like a very long time, neither one of them said a word, and Grace could feel the heavy silence, filled with all the things they had yet to learn about one another. "I suppose I should tell you more about what your life will be like here," Owen said at last. "I own a small house on the edge of town. It has 2 bedrooms, a main room that serves as a kitchen and living area, and a root cellar. It is nothing fancy, but it is built solid and stays warm. I've spent the past few months fixing it up." "I am certain it will be lovely," Grace said. "I am not looking for anything grand. There is a schoolhouse if teaching is something you'd want to do. Your letters mentioned you were a governess. A Miss Harmon is running it right now, but she's getting married to a rancher this spring. I imagine she would be grateful for the help even before she leaves." Grace felt a surge of hope in her chest. She had not let herself imagine that she could continue her work with children. "I would like that very much." "Good," Owen said, and his shoulders seemed to relax just a little. "I had a feeling you might. I know this is not easy, Grace. Marrying a man you do not know and moving to the middle of nowhere. I just want you to know I will do my best to be a good husband to you. I will not always be the easiest person to live with. My job can be dangerous, and I tend to get too wrapped up in it. But I promise I will be faithful. I will always respect you, and I will work hard to provide for you." The genuine honesty in his voice brought a lump to Grace's throat. "I appreciate you telling me that. I promise that I will do my best to be a good wife to you. I know how to cook and keep a clean house, and I can manage a budget. I will not be one to complain about hardships." "You are allowed to complain," Owen said, and she could see the hint of a smile in his eyes. "You are a person, not a statue." This time, Grace really did smile. "Well, I will try to save my complaints for only the most serious situations." "Like February," Owen's lips twitched. "It gets even colder than January, if you can believe that." "I find that very hard to imagine." "You will see." He got to his feet, still fiddling with his hat. "The storm should pass by tomorrow. I already sent a message to Reverend Miller. If you are still willing, we could be married tomorrow afternoon." Grace's heart pounded hard against her ribs. "I am willing." Owen nodded his head slowly, his gaze searching her face. "No second thoughts?" she asked herself. She pictured Boston and the life that was waiting for her if she went back. Then she looked at this solid, dependable man who had waited for her in the freezing cold, who spoke plainly about his own shortcomings, and who had thought to ask if she might want to teach. "No second thoughts," she said, her voice firm. Something in Owen's face changed then. A tension she had not even realized was there seemed to melt away. "In that case, I will see you tomorrow," he said. "Grace Anderson, for the very last time." After he had gone, Mrs. Patterson reappeared, with a knowing look in her eyes and a satisfied grin. "Well, that went nicely." "Does anything at all happen in this house that you do not see?" Grace asked, but she was smiling too. "Not much," Mrs. Patterson admitted with a cheerful tone. "And let me tell you something, my dear. I have known Owen for these past 5 years, and I have never, not once, seen him look at any person the way he just looked at you. If you give this marriage a fair shot, I believe the two of you might just find something wonderful." Grace truly wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that this huge leap of faith might lead to something more than just simple survival. But life had taught her to be careful with hope, to guard her heart against disappointment. And yet, as she lay in bed that night, she did not dwell on her fears. Instead, she thought about Owen's steady presence, his quiet thoughtfulness, and the warmth in his eyes when he had said her name. Maybe Mrs. Patterson was right. Maybe there was a real chance for something good to grow here. The morning of her wedding day arrived clear and painfully cold. Grace woke up to bright sunshine pouring through her window, lighting up a world that had been transformed into a landscape of sparkling white. The storm had blanketed everything in 3 feet of snow, piling up drifts in strange and beautiful shapes against the houses and fences. Mrs. Patterson helped her get into her best dress, a wool gown in a deep green that highlighted the reddish tints in Grace's brown hair. It was not a traditional wedding dress, but it was the nicest thing she owned, and she had protected it carefully on her long journey. "You look absolutely beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said, skillfully pinning Grace's hair into a simple twist at the base of her neck. "Owen will not be able to look away." Grace looked at her reflection in the small mirror. At 24 years old, she was not considered a young bride, especially out on the frontier, where girls often married in their teens. Her face was a bit too angular to be called pretty in the classic sense, her mouth a little too wide and her chin a little too stubborn. But her eyes were a clear, intelligent gray-green, and her hair had a certain richness when it was brushed out. "I just hope he is not disappointed," she said softly. "Oh, you could never disappoint him." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her shoulders for reassurance. "Now, Owen sent a message that he would come for you at noon. The Reverend is going to meet you both at the church." Grace felt nervous butterflies fluttering in her stomach, but she just nodded. She had made her decision. Now it was time to follow through. Owen showed up at exactly noon, wearing what was obviously his finest suit, a dark wool that made his broad shoulders look even wider. He had trimmed his hair and was clean-shaven, which showed off the strong line of his jaw. When he saw Grace standing there, he stopped short in the doorway, and she saw his eyes widen just a fraction. "You look lovely," he said, his voice a little husky. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." A bit of color rose in his cheeks, and Grace realized with a jolt that Owen was just as nervous as she was. For some reason, that made her feel a whole lot better. The walk to the church was a challenge through the deep snow, but Owen kept a firm hold on her arm, steadying her whenever she slipped. Other folks from the town were outside, shoveling pathways and calling out greetings. They watched with open curiosity as Owen and Grace walked by, and Grace could feel the weight of all those eyes on her. "They mean well," Owen said in a low voice, "but I know it can be a little uncomfortable." "I will just have to get used to it," Grace answered. "That is just how small towns are." The church was a simple wooden structure with a small steeple. It was plain inside, but it was clean and well cared for. Reverend Miller was waiting for them, a slender man with gray hair and kind eyes. Mrs. Patterson and her husband had come along, as had the general store owner and his wife and a few other townspeople. "Miss Anderson," Reverend Miller greeted her, with a warm smile. "Welcome to Hecla. Owen has been very eager for your arrival." "Thank you, Reverend. Shall we begin?" The Reverend moved to his spot in front of the simple altar, and Owen and Grace stood before him. Grace felt like she was floating in that moment, aware of every little detail. The cold air that still clung to the hem of her dress, the faint scent of pine and wood smoke in the air, the solid warmth of Owen standing so close beside her. His hand reached out and found hers, and his grip was firm and anchoring. Reverend Miller's voice washed over her, speaking the familiar words about love and devotion, about leaving all others behind and holding on to one another. Owen's replies were clear and strong, and his eyes never left her face. When it was Grace's turn to speak her vows, she was surprised at how steady and sure her own voice sounded. I, Grace Anderson, take you, Owen Ellis, to be my lawfully wedded husband. A plain gold ring slid onto her finger, and its simple weight felt heavy with meaning. This was real. She was actually becoming this man's wife. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Miller said with a warm smile. Owen, you may kiss your bride. Owen raised his hand to her face, his palm cupping her cheek with a gentle warmth before his lips met hers. The kiss was short, full of respect, but Grace could feel a promise hidden inside it, the start of something that might just blossom into more. As they separated, the little group of friends clapped, and Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, smiling through happy tears. Grace felt like she was in a dream. The tingle from his kiss still on her lips. Mrs. Ellis, Owen whispered, his voice filled with a kind of awe, like he could hardly believe it himself. Mr. Ellis, Grace answered back, trying the sound of her new name on her tongue. After they signed the official register, everyone stepped out into the bright, crisp sunlight. Mrs. Patterson gave Grace a firm, loving hug. Now you come see me if you need anything at all, you hear? I will. Thank you for everything. Owen shook hands with the other men, taking their well wishes and what sounded like some colorful advice that Grace was thankful she could not quite make out. Then he offered her his arm, and together they started walking through the snow to the place she would now call home. The house was situated on the eastern side of town, a humble building of log and plank with a shingled roof and a welcoming covered porch. A thin curl of smoke drifted up from the chimney, and the windows shone with what seemed to be brand-new glass. I know it is not much, Owen said as they got closer. It looks perfect, Grace told him, and she meant it. Next to the cramped apartment she and her mother were forced into after her father's debts came to light, this little house felt like a mansion. Owen swung the door open, and then did something that completely surprised Grace. He lifted her right up into his arms. She let out a small gasp and held onto his shoulders to keep her balance. Tradition, he explained, a slight smile playing on his lips as he carried her right across the threshold. The inside of the house was cozy and had been fixed up surprisingly well. The main room was furnished with a solid table and chairs and a sofa placed near the fireplace, with shelves that were filled with books. The kitchen corner was set up with a good stove, cupboards, and a dry sink. The entire place was spotless and orderly. You have been busy, Grace observed as Owen gently set her back on her feet. I wanted everything to be ready for you. He pointed toward a door on the right. That is the bedroom. I already put your belongings in there. The other room is a bit smaller. I have been sleeping in it, but if you like that one better, I can... Owen. Grace reached out and touched his arm, cutting off his stream of words. This is our home now. We ought to share the main bedroom. He studied her, trying to read her expression. I do not want to make you feel rushed, Grace. I know this all happened so fast. If you need some time... We are married, Grace said softly. I know what that involves. Owen gave a slow nod. I will be patient. I will do my best to make you comfortable. His thoughtfulness truly moved her. The men she had known before would have just taken their husbandly rights without a second thought for her feelings. Owen's sensitivity, his readiness to give her space right from the start, said a lot about the kind of man he was. I appreciate that, she told him, but you do not have to handle me like I am made of glass. I am tougher than I appear. This time, a real smile spread across Owen's face. I am starting to see that. The rest of the afternoon was spent finding their way in a new, slightly awkward life together. Grace took a better look around the house and discovered a root cellar filled with potatoes, carrots, onions, and apples. The bedroom had a big bed covered with a lovely quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a single chair sitting by the window. Her small traveling bag looked out of place on the large bed, her few things lost in the open space. She began to unpack, placing her other dress and a nightgown into the dresser drawers, arranging her brush and mirror on top, and hanging her mother's cameo from a nail next to the mirror. Each small action helped make the room feel like it was hers. When she came out, Owen was tending to the fire with practiced ease. "Are you hungry? I have some venison stew on. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage a few simple meals. I am happy to do the cooking," Grace offered. "That was part of our arrangement." "Not tonight," Owen said, standing up straight. "Tonight you should just rest. You have had a long journey, and these past few days have been a lot to take in." Grace felt the urge to protest, but a wave of weariness washed over her. The trip, the worry, the wedding, it all hit her at once. "Perhaps you are right." They had Owen's venison stew for dinner, which tasted much better than he let on, and ate it with some bread from the general store. Their conversation was careful, avoiding the bigger issues and sticking to safe things like the weather and the town layout. As the daylight started to fade outside, Grace could feel a tension building, knowing that bedtime was getting closer. At last, Owen got up and started to bank the fire for the night. "It is getting late." Grace's heart began to beat faster. "Yes." Owen turned to look at her directly. "Grace, I was serious about what I said before. I will not push you into anything. We can just go to sleep. There is no hurry." A part of Grace wanted to take his offer, to put off an intimacy that felt like too much, with a man who was still a stranger. But another part of her understood that waiting would only make things harder and build up the nervousness. It was better to just move ahead and start creating whatever their life together was going to be. "I am your wife," she said in a low voice. "I understand my obligations." Owen closed the distance between them in 3 long steps. He placed his hands on her shoulders. His grip was gentle but sure. "Grace, look at me." She lifted her head to meet his gaze and saw a deep emotion there that took her breath away. "This is not an obligation," he said, his voice quiet and serious. "At least, I hope one day it will not feel like one. I will not pretend I do not desire you, but I want you to be with me because you want to be, not because you feel you have to. Can you see the difference?" Grace felt a change deep inside her. In all the time she had worried about this moment, she had never expected this. She had braced herself for a demand, or maybe a rough touch hidden behind polite words. She never imagined Owen would be concerned with her own feelings, her actual willingness. "I am willing," she said, and was surprised to find that it was the truth. "I am nervous, but I am willing." Owen's thumb gently brushed along her jawline. "I will be gentle with you, I promise." He bent down slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away, and then he kissed her. This kiss was much deeper than the one at the church, more tender and searching. Grace's hands came up to his chest, and she could feel the hard muscle under his shirt and the steady thump of his heart. A warmth spread through her, strange but not unwelcome. Owen drew back a little, his own breathing unsteady. "Come to bed." In the bedroom, with only the moonlight on the snow lighting the room, they undressed with clumsy fingers. Owen looked away to give Grace some privacy, a kindness she was thankful for as she slipped out of her dress and into her nightgown. When she got under the cool sheets, Owen joined her. She could feel the heat from his body, even though they were not touching. He shifted onto his side to face her, and his hand found hers under the blankets. "I am glad you came, Grace. I am so glad you are here." "I am glad too," Grace whispered, and she truly meant it. What happened next was hesitant and gentle, a little clumsy at times, but never rough. Owen stayed true to his word, taking his time and making sure she was comfortable. Grace felt exposed but not in danger, unsure but not scared. When it was all over, Owen pulled her close, stroking her hair. Grace was surprised to feel tears welling up in her eyes for reasons she could not quite figure out. "Are you all right?" Owen asked, his voice full of concern. "Yes," Grace answered. "It is just... I did not expect you to be so kind." Owen's arms held her a little tighter. "What sort of men have you known?" "Not many," Grace confessed. "But the few I did know were not very kind at all." "Then they were fools," Owen said, and kissed the top of her head. "Get some sleep now. You are safe with me." Grace laid her head on Owen's chest and closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. She was a married woman, in bed with a man she barely knew, in a town 2,000 miles from anything she had ever called home. But for the first time in a very long while, she felt a small, fragile sense of peace. The next few days settled into a rhythm of their own. Grace would get up early to cook breakfast, figuring out the moods of the new stove and the limits of what they had in the pantry. Owen ate everything she made without a single complaint, even the time she got the heat wrong and burned the biscuits. Every morning he would head out to make his rounds through town, talking with the shopkeepers, handling small disagreements, and just making sure things stayed quiet. Grace used her first few days to really get to know Hika. The town was small enough that you could walk from one end to the other in 20 minutes. It had one main street with all the shops and a couple of side streets where people lived. There was a general store run by a quiet man named Mr. Hayes and his friendly wife Martha. It also had a saloon that looked decent enough, at least in the daytime, along with a blacksmith, a livery stable, a doctor's office, and the schoolhouse. Miss Harmon turned out to be a young woman of about 20 with blonde hair and a welcoming smile. "Oh, I am so pleased to meet you," she said when Grace introduced herself. "Owen told me you used to be a teacher. Would you really be interested in helping out?" "Very much so," Grace said. "Wonderful. I have 18 students here from 6 all the way up to 14 years old. It is a real challenge trying to manage all the different learning levels. If you could take the younger children while I work with the older ones, that would be a tremendous help model." It was settled that Grace would start helping out 3 days a week, and a quiet sense of pride washed over her. She would have her own purpose here, something that was hers alone, and not just about being Owen's wife. She also began to get to know the other women in town. Mrs. Patterson was kind enough to introduce her to folks, and while some kept to themselves, most gave her a warm welcome. They were curious about her, of course, asking about Boston and how in the world she came to marry Owen. Grace chose her words carefully when she answered, only sharing what felt right. The evenings soon became her favorite part of the day. Owen would come home just as the sun was dipping low, stomping the fresh snow from his boots and bringing the clean, cold smell of the outside in with him. Grace always had dinner waiting, and they would sit at their little table talking about how their days had gone. Owen would tell her all about the townspeople, their family histories, and their funny little ways. In return, Grace would share stories about the children at the school or about her chats with Martha Hayes or Mrs. Patterson. At night, they shared the big warm bed, and slowly being close to each other started to feel less like an arrangement and more like a comfort. Owen was a good and gentle man, learning what made her happy and always making sure she found pleasure in their time together. Grace found herself actually looking forward to those quiet, dark hours when Owen's touch made her feel things she never knew her heart was capable of feeling. About 3 weeks after they were married, a warm front moved in. It melted a good bit of the snow and turned all the streets into pure mud. One evening, Owen walked in the door with a troubled look on his face, and Grace felt a little knot of worry tighten in her stomach. "What is it? What's wrong?" she asked, placing their dinner on the table. Owen took off his heavy coat and hung it up just so. "We've had a few thefts around town, some tools from the blacksmith, supplies from the general store, and food from the boarding house. They're small things, but it keeps happening. I have a good idea who is doing it." Owen sat down with a heavy sigh. "There is a group of miners who lost their jobs when the Silver Bell mine shut down last month. They're having a real hard time and their money is running out. I think some of them are stealing just to get by. Well, that makes a certain kind of sense, doesn't it? Grace said gently. If they are that desperate. It's understandable, sure, but it is still against the law. Owen rubbed his face, looking tired down to the bone. I have a job to do, Grace. I have to enforce the law, even when I feel for the folks who are breaking it. Grace could hear the struggle in his voice, and she knew he was in a tough spot. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to try and find an answer that does not involve locking up starving men, Owen said, looking up at her. But I will be honest, I do not know what that answer is just yet. For the next few days, Owen was gone from sunup to sundown, meeting with the mine owners, the town merchants, and the mayor. Grace watched him get more and more tense, the worry lines around his eyes getting deeper. She wanted so badly to help, but had no idea how. Then, one evening, a thought popped into her head. She found Owen in his small office, surrounded by stacks of papers. What if the merchants agreed to hire those miners for odd jobs, she suggested. You know, for repairs, hauling things, whatever needs doing. It would give the men some money in their pockets and fix the problem without anyone having to go to jail. Owen just stared at her for a moment, his eyes full of surprise and something that looked a lot like admiration. That might just work. And maybe the church could get together some donations, like food and supplies. Not as a handout, but as a community helping its own through a rough patch. Grace Ellis, you are a brilliant woman. Owen stood up and pulled her into a big hug, kissing her right then and there. I will talk to the merchants first thing in the morning and to Reverend Miller. His plan, which was mostly Grace's idea, worked even better than they had hoped. The merchants were happy to have the help. The church organized the donations, and just like that, the stealing stopped. The miners were grateful for a chance to earn an honest dollar and turned out to be a real asset to the town. In fact, several of them ended up getting hired on for good. After that, the way Owen looked at Grace seemed to change. She would catch him just watching her, with a warmth in his eyes that made her heart do a little flip. He started asking for her opinion on other town matters, treating her like a real partner, not just a wife he had to provide for. Grace realized she was falling in love with him, and it happened so quietly she almost did not notice. It was in all the little things he did, like the way Owen always made sure the house was warm before she even got out of bed, or how he brought her little bouquets of wildflowers when the first spring blooms started peeking out. It was in the careful way he listened when she talked, as if every word she said was important to him. One evening in late March, they were sitting together on the sofa by the fire. Grace rested her head on Owen's shoulder and felt a wave of happiness so strong it almost took her breath away. I am happy, she said, surprised to hear herself say the thought out loud. Owen's arm wrapped around her, pulling her in even closer. Me too, he said softly. I did not expect this, Grace went on. When I agreed to come out here, I was just hoping to be safe, to have a roof over my head. I never dreamed I would actually be happy. Neither did I. Owen's voice was low and quiet. After I lost my family, I did not think I would ever feel this way about anything again. Grace lifted her head to look right at him. You have never told me about what happened. Owen was quiet for a long moment, and Grace figured he might not answer. Then he took a deep breath. I had a wife and a little girl back in Kansas. Their names were Sarah and Emma. Emma was only 3 years old. She was all curls and smiles, and Sarah, she was the kindest person I have ever known. The way he spoke about them in the past tense hit Grace like a physical blow. What happened to them? She whispered. Cholera. It came through our town one summer. They were both gone within a week of each other. I could not save them. There was nothing I could do but sit there and watch them fade away. Owen's voice was flat, with no emotion in it at all. But Grace could feel the old, deep pain coming off of him. After they were gone, I just could not stay there anymore. Every single thing reminded me of them. So I came out here to start over. I figured I would just exist, you know. Do my job, get through each day. I never expected to feel anything real again. Oh, Owen. Grace turned all the way toward him, putting her hands on his face. She could see the grief in his eyes, old but still there, and her heart just broke for him. I am so, so sorry. I need you to know something, Owen said, his voice urgent. I do not see you as a replacement for her. You are not Sarah. What we have, it is something different, but it is real. I care about you, Grace. I care about you a whole lot. I know, Grace said, and she kissed him, soft and gentle. I care about you a whole lot, too. That night, when they made love, there was a tenderness there that was more than just physical. Grace felt like they were truly connected, not just their bodies, but their souls. Afterward, as they lay tangled up in the warm darkness, she whispered, I love you. She felt Owen's whole body go still for a second. Then his arms tightened around her, almost like he was afraid to let go. I love you too, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought I would say those words to anyone ever again. But I mean them. I love you, Grace. Grace felt tears slide down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they were happy tears. She had not come here looking for love in this arranged marriage of theirs. She had only been hoping for a safe place to land, but here in this little town in Montana, with this steady and kind-hearted man, she had found something so much more valuable. Spring arrived slowly in Hecla. The snow would melt a little, then freeze again. But it finally gave way to a landscape that was more beautiful than she could have imagined. Grace fell in love with the mountains that rose up to the west, their tops still covered in snow, even while wildflowers bloomed down in the valleys. She loved the enormous sky that looked like it went on forever, so different from the crowded gray skies of Boston. Her job at the school got bigger when Miss Harmon married a rancher in April and moved out to his place 20 miles away. Grace took over all the teaching duties. She absolutely loved the work, especially watching the children's faces light up when they finally figured something out. Owen came and built new shelves for the schoolhouse and fixed the drafty windows, and Grace felt a swell of pride just watching him work with his hands. Their life together found a comfortable, easy rhythm. They had their little disagreements, same as any couple. Grace worried that Owen took too many chances in his job as the town marshal. Owen thought Grace worked herself too hard, teaching all day and then coming home to cook and keep the house. But they were learning how to talk things out, how to meet in the middle and see things from the other's side. Then one day in May, Grace realized she had missed her monthly cycle. She waited a week and then another, not wanting to get her hopes up or say anything until she was sure. But when the other signs started showing up, there was no mistaking it. She knew she had to tell Owen. She picked a quiet evening when Owen seemed relaxed, and the two of them were just sitting on the front porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. Owen, I have something I need to tell you. He turned to her right away, his full attention on her. What is it? She took a breath. I'm going to have a baby. Owen's eyes went wide. His face went from shock to wonder to pure joy so fast it almost made Grace laugh out loud. Are you serious? For real? I am. I think I am about 2 months along. Owen stood up and pulled her to her feet, wrapping her up in a big hug. Grace, that is the most wonderful news. Are you happy about it? I am, she said. And she was surprised to find it was the honest truth. 6 months ago, the idea of having a child would have scared her to death. But now, with Owen, in this home they had made, all she felt was happiness and excitement. Am I happy? I am more than happy, Owen said. He pulled back a little to look at her, and his hand came to rest so gently on her stomach, which was still flat. A baby. Our baby. But then Grace saw a shadow of worry cross his eyes, and she knew exactly what he was thinking. Owen, This baby is ours. This time will be different." "I know," he said, but his hand was trembling just a little bit. I cannot stand the thought of losing somebody else that I love." Grace put her hand over his. "We will be careful. Doc Brennan is a good doctor. I am young and strong, and you are not going to lose me. I am far too stubborn for that." Owen actually managed a small smile at that. "Yes," he said. "Yes, you are." In the months that followed, as Grace's body changed and grew rounder with their child, Owen became so protective it was almost funny. He did not want her lifting anything heavy. He did not even want her walking too far. And he worried himself sick about her well-being. Grace found his concern both sweet and a little suffocating. "I am carrying a child, Owen, not a crate of delicate china," she teased him one August afternoon as he tried to take a laundry basket from her. "I know, I am just so scared," he admitted softly. Grace's expression softened. "I know you are, but you have got to have a little faith in me and believe that this will all turn out right." Owen truly did try. Grace could see the sheer force of will it took, but he made the effort. He still watched her like a hawk, but he would back away if she insisted she was all right. And Grace got better at seeing when his anxiety was getting the best of him, knowing just when he needed to hear that she and the baby were safe and sound. The women of the town truly took Grace under their wing as her time drew near. They put together a little party for her, bringing gifts for the new baby, like tiny shirts and soft blankets and little rattles. Mrs. Patterson had spent weeks knitting a lovely blanket in shades of blue and yellow. Martha Hayes came with a wooden cradle, beautifully carved by her own husband. Grace was simply overcome by the kindness of these women who had been complete strangers to her just a few months before. "You are one of our own now," Mrs. Patterson told her, giving her a warm hug. "Around here, we look after our folks." Late in October, right as the first snowflakes of winter started to drift down, Grace felt the very first twinge of labor. She was in the schoolhouse telling the children goodbye for the day when the pain grabbed her. She held onto her desk, breathing slowly until it passed. Then she asked one of the older boys to please go and get Owen. He came running, his face as white as a sheet. "Is it time?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I reckon it is," Grace said, trying to give him a comforting smile. But another wave of pain washed over her, even stronger this time. Owen managed to get her home and immediately sent for Doc Brennan and Mrs. Patterson. After that, he just paced around nervously, while Mrs. Patterson took control of the situation. She helped Grace get comfortable in bed, checked on her, and announced that everything seemed to be progressing as it should. "This is going to take a good while," Mrs. Patterson said calmly. "First babies like to take their sweet time. Owen, you probably ought to wait out in the main room." "I want to stay right here," Owen insisted. "Owen," Grace began, but he cut her off. "Please." He reached for her hand. "I have to be here with you." Grace looked into his eyes and saw the raw fear, the haunting memory of losing his first wife and their little girl. She squeezed his hand tightly. "Stay." It was a very long labor. Doc Brennan would look in on Grace from time to time, always saying things were normal, just moving along slowly. Mrs. Patterson worked to keep Grace as comfortable as she could, dabbing her forehead with a cool cloth and helping her walk the floor when moving seemed to help with the pain. And Owen never left her side. He held her hand, whispered words of support, his own face a mask of deep concern. As the hours dragged into one another and the pain grew more intense, Grace started to truly grasp the depth of Owen's fear. This was a difficult road, so much harder than she had ever imagined, and the only way to the end was to go straight through it. But she fixed her eyes on Owen's face, drawing strength from his unwavering presence, and she just kept going. At long last, as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Doc Brennan announced, "All right, Grace, it is time to push." The moments that followed were a whirlwind of agony and effort, punctuated by shouts of encouragement. Then, all at once, there was a feeling of release, and the sharp, sudden cry of a newborn baby filled the entire room. "It is a boy," Doc Brennan declared, holding up a red, wailing infant for all to see. "A fine, healthy boy." He gently placed the baby into Grace's arms, and she gazed down at that tiny, perfect face. Her son, their son. Tears of joy streamed down her face. "Owen," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Owen was crying too, with no shame at all, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch the baby's soft head. "He is just perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Grace. Thank you." They decided to name him Oliver, after Owen's father. He was a sweet baby, quiet and content, and Grace bounced back from the delivery in no time. Owen was absolutely smitten with his son. He would spend hours just looking at him sleep, holding him close, and speaking to him in a soft, gentle voice that Grace had never heard from him before. "You know, I never thought I would have this again," Owen said one night, as they lay there in the quiet of their bedroom. Oliver was sound asleep in his cradle right beside them. "I truly believed that part of my life was finished for good. But you brought it back to me. You gave me a family." Grace turned to look him in the eyes. "We gave each other a family, Owen. I came to this town with absolutely nothing. I was running from a life that I just could not live anymore. You gave me a home, a sense of safety and respect, and so much love." Owen leaned in and kissed her gently. "I swear I still find it hard to believe you are really mine." "I am all yours," Grace whispered back. "And you are all mine. Forever." That first winter with baby Oliver was certainly a challenge, but it was filled with pure joy. Grace chose not to go back to teaching, focusing instead on raising their son. She did not regret it for a second. The school board hired a new young teacher from Denver, and Grace was perfectly content to be at home. As little Oliver grew, his true personality started to blossom. He was such a happy baby, always ready with a smile and completely fascinated by the world around him. He had his daddy's blue eyes and his mama's dark hair, and the two together were simply beautiful. That spring, when Oliver was about 6 months old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. Owen was over the moon, but Grace could see that familiar flicker of worry come back into his eyes. This time, however, the pregnancy was much easier than the first, and she carried their new baby with a sense of peace and confidence. Their second son, Oscar, was born that December, arriving in a hurry and with none of the trouble Oliver had given them. He was louder than his older brother and a bit more demanding, but he was loved just as fiercely. They had 2 boys. Grace would watch Owen with their sons, and her heart would feel so full it could nearly burst. He was a wonderful father, so patient and full of fun. He taught them things as they grew, helped them up when they failed, and cheered for them when they succeeded. The years went by in a sweet haze of simple, everyday moments that Grace cherished. There were first steps and first words, scraped knees and bouts of sickness, school performances and long fishing trips. Owen stayed on as the Marshal of Hecla, a man the whole community looked up to and trusted. Grace went back to teaching part-time after the boys got a little older. She loved the work, but she always made certain that her family was her first priority. They faced their share of hardships, to be sure. The winters could be terribly harsh. There were times when money was scarce. Owen broke his leg something awful one year while dealing with a horse thief, and Grace took care of him through many months of slow healing. Oscar came down with pneumonia when he was 5, and they spent several terrifying days not knowing if he would pull through. But he did. And through every trial, their love for one another grew deeper and stronger. The fiery passion of their early days cooled into something more steady, but it was just as powerful. They knew each other's every fault and loved each other anyway, or maybe even because of them. They learned how to be a team, to lift each other up during the hard times, and to celebrate together when things were good. On their 10th anniversary, Owen took Grace back to the very spot where she had first arrived on that cold January day. It was summertime now. The air was warm and the sun was bright, and the town was thriving and growing. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked her quietly. "Coming all the way out here, marrying a man you did not even know." Grace looked at him, at the man who had become the very center of her whole world. His hair had hints of gray now, and the lines around his eyes were deeper. But he was still her solid, dependable Owen. He was still the man who had stood waiting in the freezing cold, just for her. "Never for a moment," she said, her voice firm. "It was the single best choice I ever made in my life." Owen pulled her into his arms. "I love you, Grace Ellis. I think I have loved you from the very second you stepped down from that stagecoach, even if I was too stubborn to know it then. I love you too, and I always will." They stood there together in the warm sunshine, looking back toward the house where their sons were playing in the yard. The house where their entire life together had been built. Grace thought back to the frightened young woman she used to be, the one who was running from a life she could not bear, who was only hoping to survive. She had found so much more than that out here. She had found a home. She had found a deep and lasting love. She had found her true self. The years kept rolling by, bringing with them new difficulties and new happiness. Oliver grew into a serious and thoughtful young man who loved his books. He eventually went off to Helena to study law. Oscar was the more adventurous one, restless just like his father had been at his age. He took a job as a ranch hand and always talked about wanting to see more of the territory. Grace and Owen faced it all side by side. When Owen finally hung up his badge as marshal at 55 years old, he started a small ranch just outside of town. Grace kept on teaching until she was in her late 50s, guiding the younger teachers and watching whole new generations of children come through her classroom. They grew old in each other's company. Their hair turned to silver, and their steps became slower. But their hands would still find one another in the dark of the night. They got to welcome grandchildren into their lives. There was Oliver's daughter, Emma, named in honor of Owen's first child, and then Oscar's twin boys. Grace would hold these precious babies and just marvel at how their love had created new life for years to come. One peaceful autumn evening, as they sat together on their porch watching the sun dip below the mountains they had looked at for 40 years, Owen reached for Grace's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that day you got here. That terrible storm, the biting cold, and how scared you looked when you got off that stage." "I was terrified," Grace confessed. "I had no idea what kind of life I was stepping into." "I was waiting in the cold for you," Owen said, repeating the first words he ever spoke to her. "I meant it just as it sounded back then. But now I look back, and I reckon I had been waiting for you a whole lot longer than I knew. I was waiting for someone to bring the light back into my life." Grace felt the sting of tears in her eyes. Even after all these years, Owen's words could still stir her soul. "And you were waiting for me, too, even though neither of us could have known it. I came here just looking for a safe place to land. What I found was everything." "We sure are lucky," Owen said in a soft voice. "We are blessed," Grace corrected him gently. They sat together in a comfortable quiet as the evening turned to night, just two people who had begun as strangers and had built a beautiful life full of love and purpose together, side by side. Grace let her mind drift back over all the seasons they had shared, thinking of every moment, the life-altering and the simple, that had been stitched together to make their history. She remembered showing up in a blizzard, scared half to death, and with nowhere else to go. Owen had stood waiting for her in that bitter cold, a lonely man taking a wild guess on his future. But from that moment, they started building something warm, a little bit of light against all the dark. They made a family, they built a home, and they nurtured a love that had stood tall against every single storm. As the first stars started to pepper the evening sky, Grace leaned her head on Owen's shoulder, and his arm wrapped around her without a second thought. This right here was home. This was what love felt like. This was the one place in all the world she was supposed to be, and she had never known a deeper happiness. Many years down the road, when Oliver came back home with his own family for Christmas, he found his folks sitting in that very same spot on the porch, all bundled up in blankets, just watching the snow come down easy over the mountains. "Y'all are gonna catch your death out here," he teased them softly. Owen and Grace just shared a look, and a little smile played on Grace's lips. "Son, we've weathered plenty of cold nights together. It does not scare us anymore." Oliver just shook his head, but he was smiling too. His whole life he had watched the love between his parents, and he knew deep down that what they shared was a rare and beautiful thing. He prayed he could build a love half as strong with his own wife. The house behind them was a warm and glowing contrast, alive with the noise of grandkids laughing and playing, Oscar debating something with his brother in good fun, and the delicious smell of food wafting from the kitchen. This was the world Grace and Owen had made. It was more than just a house and a family. It was a legacy of true love. That night, long after the house had grown quiet, Grace and Owen were lying together in the dark. It was the same bed frame they had shared for 45 years, even if the mattress had been changed out a few times. The house itself had grown and been improved over time, but at its heart, it was still the same small home where they had started their entire life together. "Are you happy, Grace?" Owen's voice was just a soft whisper in the quiet room. "Every single day," Grace replied, and she meant it with all her soul. "Are you?" "More than I ever dreamed was possible." Owen's hand searched for hers under the heavy quilts. "I was just waiting out in the cold for you, and you came and brought me back to the living. You gave me so much more than a man like me ever deserved." "We gave each other exactly what we needed," Grace said softly. "That was the real miracle. We were both a little broken, each in our own way, and somehow we put each other back together." "I love you," Owen whispered. "I love you too, my dear. Always have, always will." They slowly drifted off to sleep, their hands still holding tight, just two souls who had taken a wild, desperate gamble on one another and ended up winning everything they had ever looked for. Outside, the snow kept coming down, a quiet blanket of white covering the town of Hecla, just like it had that very first day Grace had come to town. But this time, there was no fear or doubt in the air, only a deep sense of peace, a quiet contentment, and a love that had faced down every storm and had only grown stronger because of it. The following morning broke clear and beautiful, with the sun sparkling on the fresh snow. Grace woke up before Owen, just like she did most mornings, and she lay there for a spell, just quietly, watching him sleep. His face was etched with the lines of a life well lived, and his hair was as white as the snow outside. But in her heart, she still saw the very same man who had waited for her in the freezing cold. The man who had shown her patience and kindness when he had every right to be demanding. The man who had loved her with a devotion as steady as the earth itself. Her mind wandered to a letter she wrote to her mother all those years ago, trying to put into words her new life, trying to make her understand how she could find such happiness in a place she never expected. Her mother had managed to visit 2 times before she passed away, so she got to see with her own eyes what Grace and Owen had built from scratch. "You chose a good one," her mother had told her on that second visit, as they watched Owen patiently teaching young Oliver how to ride. "Better than I could have ever picked out for you." And Grace knew she was right. She had chosen well, even though back then it felt a whole lot more like she was running out of options than making a choice. But maybe that is the very definition of faith. Just taking that one blind step forward into a future you cannot see, and trusting that things will find a way of working out. Owen began to stir next to her, and his eyes fluttered open. A warm smile spread across his face when he saw her looking at him. "Mornin', my love." "Good morning," Grace whispered, leaning in to give him a soft kiss. "What has got you looking so serious over there?" Owen asked, his hand coming up to gently tuck a stray piece of silver hair behind her ear. Just thinking about how far we have come. Just feeling so very grateful. No, I am the one who is grateful, Owen said. You are the one who took a gamble on me. Traveled all this way and made a life with a man you had never met. You took a gamble, too, Grace reminded him. You could have gotten anybody off that stagecoach. Someone selfish, or mean, or just someone you could not live with for a single day. But I got you, Owen said, pulling her in close to him. I got the perfect one. Oh, I am a long way from perfect. You are perfect for me, Owen corrected her gently. From down the hall, they could hear the rest of the house starting to wake up, the sound of their grandchildren's laughter, the deep rumble of Oscar's voice calling out to his boys, all the familiar sounds of the family coming together on Christmas morning. We probably ought to get up, Grace said, though she did not want to move. Just one more minute, Owen pleaded, holding on a little tighter. Let me just hold my wife for one more minute before all the commotion starts. Grace snuggled back into his arms, feeling a contentment so deep it settled in her bones. This was the life she never even had the courage to wish for back in those awful days in Boston. This feeling of warmth, this incredible love, this feeling of belonging so completely with another human being. I would live through it all again, she said, the thought coming to her out of the blue. Every single hardship, every last challenge. I would do it all over again if it meant ending up right here. Me too, Owen agreed without hesitation. Every last one of those moments, the good and the bad, they all led us right here. I would not change a blessed thing. At last, they got up and dressed, then went to join the family in the living area. Oliver already had a good fire roaring in the hearth, and Oscar was in the kitchen helping his mother-in-law get breakfast ready. The grandchildren were all gathered around the tree, sizing up the smaller presents, even though they knew the rule about waiting until after they ate. Grace paused in the doorway, just soaking it all in. This was the legacy she had built. It was not just her two sons, but the wonderful grandchildren they were raising. It was the bedrock of love and steadiness and faith that she knew would be passed down for generations to come. This was the life she and Owen had created from nothing. Owen came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist. That is quite a crew we have got, is not it? The best crew a body could ever ask for, Grace agreed. Emma, who was Oliver's daughter, saw them standing there and gave them a warm smile. At 16, she was growing into a lovely young woman with the same thoughtful and kind heart as her daddy. You two are always standing just like that, she pointed out. Papa says you have been doing that since the very day you were married. Well, it is the best place to stand, Owen told her, pulling Grace just a little bit tighter, right next to the person you love more than anyone else in the world. Grandpa, will you tell us the story again? Emma asked, about how you and Grandma first met. It was a question they got all the time from the grandkids, and Grace never once got tired of the telling. She and Owen would take turns with the parts, painting the picture of that snowy day she first set foot in Hecla, scared out of her wits and unsure of everything, and how Owen was right there waiting. I have been waiting in the cold for you. Owen said his famous line just like he did every time he told their story. And the moment I saw her step off that stagecoach, I knew right then and there that my waiting had come to an end. Even when you did not even know who she was? Emma asked, completely captivated by the romance of it all, just like always. Especially because I did not know her, Owen explained. I was taking a leap of faith, we both were. And it turned out to be the single best decision of my entire life. Grace reached out and gave his hand a tight squeeze. Mine too, she added. The rest of the day was a happy, noisy tumble of family. There was a big breakfast, followed by presents being passed around with lots of laughter and happy shouts. Oscar's two boys were tearing around the house with their new toys, while Emma was curled up in a corner, already lost in the new book she had gotten. Grace spent the afternoon cooking the big Christmas dinner with help from her daughters-in-law, two women she had grown to love as if they were her very own. When evening came and everyone was finally gathered at the dinner table, Owen stood up to say the blessing. But before he started the usual prayer, he took a moment to look at all the faces of his family, and his eyes finally came to rest on Grace. "I have so many things to be grateful for," he began. "For the food on this table, for this warm home, for my fine sons and their beautiful families. But most of all, I am grateful for my wife, Grace. 45 years ago, she took a blind leap of faith and traveled to this wild country to marry a man she had never seen. She had 100 chances to turn around and go back. She could have regretted her choice every single day, but she did not. She stayed, and she built this entire life right alongside me. Every good thing I have in my life today grew from that one single brave choice she made all those years ago." Grace could feel the warm tears starting to roll down her face. Owen went on, "She is the one who taught me that a broken heart can mend, that real love can grow from the most sensible of plans, and that the very best parts of life are usually the ones you find where you least expect them. So, Grace, right here in front of our whole family, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming all the way to Hecla in a blizzard, for marrying me, for loving me, and for giving me this family, this home, and this happiness. You are the single greatest blessing this man has ever known." There was not a single person at that table with dry eyes when Owen was done speaking. Grace got up from her chair and walked over to him, and he folded her into his arms as their whole family watched. "I love you," Grace whispered into his shirt. "I will love you with my last breath, and even after that." "And I love you," Owen answered. "My mail-order bride who became the love of my entire life." They all ate dinner together, the big, beautiful family that Grace and Owen had made, and the room was filled with warmth and laughter and so much love. Outside, the snow started to fall once more, a soft and steady sheet of white covering Hecla. But inside that house, there was nothing but light and warmth, and the sure and certain knowledge that they were all exactly where they were meant to be. As the night started to settle in and folks began getting ready for bed, she stepped out onto the quiet porch. Fat, heavy snowflakes were drifting down now, reminding her of the very first night she had come to this place. She heard the familiar creak of the door, and then felt the warmth and weight of Owen's coat as he draped it around her. "You are going to catch your death of cold," he said softly, his arms wrapping around her waist from behind. "I just wanted to watch the snow," Grace murmured. "It feels just like that first night." "Yes. I was so scared, Owen. I had no idea what kind of man you were, or what sort of life I was walking into. All I knew for sure was that I could not go back." "And what about now?" Owen asked. Grace turned around in his embrace to look him in the eye. "Now I cannot imagine living any other way. This place is my home. You are my home. Everything I ever dreamed of or ever needed is right here with you." Owen gently cradled her face with his hands and gave her a kiss that was slow and sweet, filled with the story of all the years they had known. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. "Get yourself inside before you turn into an icicle," Grace teased, playfully repeating what he had just told her. "I have known my share of cold years," Owen replied, a twinkle in his eyes. "But having you here by my side, I have never been warmer." They went back into the house together, shutting the door against the snowy world outside. The home was still and quiet, with the rest of the family sound asleep. Grace and Owen went about their nightly rituals with a comfortable rhythm born from decades of practice, each one anticipating the other's movements and needs without a word. Tucked under the heavy quilts her grandmother had stitched, they lay in each other's arms and spoke in low voices about their day, their family, and what tomorrow might bring. It was perfectly ordinary, and because of that, it was perfect. The very life they had carefully built together over 45 years. "Grace," Owen whispered, as they started to drift off. "Yes?" Thank you for showing up for me in that blizzard. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for loving me." A smile touched Grace's lips in the dark room. "And thank you for waiting out in the cold for me. Thank you for being so patient. Thank you for showing me what love was supposed to feel like." They finally fell asleep, still wrapped in an embrace. They were two souls who had gambled everything on a single chance and ended up winning a prize greater than they had ever known to wish for. The years that came after were filled with more happiness and their share of heartache. They said goodbye to old friends who passed from sickness or age. They watched their own grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. They saw the town of Heckler change right before their eyes, growing more modern with each passing year, but somehow holding on to its true spirit. And through every bit of it, Grace and Owen were each other's rock. Time made them more frail. Their steps became slower and they needed more help, but their love for one another never faded. In fact, it seemed to grow even stronger, becoming purer and more essential with time. On a bright spring morning during their 62nd year of marriage, Grace woke up and saw Owen just looking at her, his expression so full of tender affection it nearly stole her breath. "What are you staring at?" she asked. "I was just laying here thinking how beautiful you are," Owen said, "and how lucky that makes me." Grace let out a soft laugh, a sound that was still like music after 86 years. "I am just an old woman, all wrinkled and gray." "You are perfect," Owen insisted. "Just as perfect as you were the day you stepped down from that stagecoach." "You are a terrible liar," Grace told him with affection. "But I do love you for it." "It is the God's honest truth," Owen protested. "Grace, there has not been a single day in the 62 years I have known you that you were not beautiful. Your beauty was never about being young or having smooth skin. It is in your goodness, your deep-down strength, and the way you love everyone. That is a kind of beauty that has only gotten richer over time." Grace could feel tears welling up in her eyes. Even after all this time, Owen's words could still touch her heart so deeply. "What on earth did I ever do to deserve a man like you?" "You got on a stagecoach and put your trust in a man you had never met," Owen said. "You took a great leap of faith, and I will be thankful for that leap for every day I have left." They passed that morning like they passed most of their mornings now, sitting close together on their porch, watching the morning light spill over the world. Hecka was a completely different place from the little mining town Grace had first seen so long ago. It was much larger now and more prosperous, with better roads and new modern comforts. But the mountains had not changed one bit, still rising up like giants to the west, underneath a sky that was still impossibly huge. "You have any regrets?" Owen asked her, a question he often posed. "Not a single one," Grace answered the same way she always did. "My only one is that we did not have more time," Owen said quietly. "But even wishing for that is just being greedy. We have had more than most people ever get." Grace rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady, familiar beat of his heart. She knew that what they had was a precious gift, not just because of how long their marriage lasted, but because of how good it was. Together, they had built something truly rare and valuable, something that would send ripples down through their family for generations. 3 months later, when Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep, Grace mourned with a heavy heart. But it was a heart full of gratitude, not bitterness. They had been given 62 years together, years that were brimming with love, laughter, and a true sense of purpose. Not many folks get to say that. At the funeral, which felt like it was attended by half the state of Montana, Oliver spoke about his father's dedication to justice and to his family. Oscar talked about his father's quiet strength and his gentleness. But it was their granddaughter, Emma, now a married woman with children of her own, who perfectly described what Grace and Owen's love meant to everyone. "My grandparents showed all of us what love could really be," she said, her voice full of emotion, voice trembling just a little. "They began as two strangers, thrown together by nothing more than circumstance. But they made a choice every single day to love each other, to lift each other up, and to build a beautiful life together. They taught us that love is not just a passing feeling, but a deliberate choice, an action you take, and a promise you keep new every morning. Grandpa waited in the freezing cold for Grandma, and she traveled through a blizzard to find him. And from that impossible beginning, they created one of the greatest love stories of all time. Grace sat there in the front pew, with her sons and grandchildren and great-grandchildren all around her, and she could feel Owen's presence as if he were sitting right there with her. He was gone from this world, but the life they had built was still standing strong. It was alive in their family, in the values they had taught them, and in the powerful example of their love. After the service, while folks were heading home, young Emma came and sat down next to Grace. "Grandma, are you going to be okay?" Grace managed a smile through her tears. "I am so sad, sweetheart. I will miss your grandpa more than words can say. But I'm also so grateful. We had a special thing, something not everyone finds, and now I have all of you, his legacy and mine." "Tell me the story one more time," Emma asked quietly, "about the snowstorm." So Grace told it again, the story she had shared more times than she could count. It was about a frightened young woman who had crossed 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never met. It was about the man who waited for her in the biting cold, full of patience and kindness. It was about how they both took a tremendous risk and built a love that lasted for a lifetime. "I have been waiting in the cold for you," Grace recited Owen's words, and they still made her heart ache with a sweet sorrow. He had just meant it as a simple fact, but it had grown to mean so much more. "He waited for me, and I came to him. And in finding each other, we found everything we had ever been looking for." Emma wrapped her arms around her grandmother and held her tight. "That is the most beautiful love story I have ever heard." "It was beautiful," Grace agreed. "And it was real. That is what made it count." Grace lived on for another 3 years after Owen's passing, staying sharp and involved with her family right up to the end. She filled her last years surrounded by those she loved, sharing her stories, offering her wisdom, and loving with all her might. When she finally passed on at 89 years old, it was peacefully, with Owen's name on her lips and a gentle smile on her face. They buried her right beside Owen in the Heckler Cemetery, beneath the shade of a tall pine tree that looked out at the mountains they both had cherished. Their headstone was carved with a simple line: Owen Ellis and Grace Ellis. He waited in the cold. She came through the storm. Together they found home. The family gathered later at the house that Owen had built with his own hands, and Grace had filled with warmth and love. Oliver stood on the very porch where his parents had spent countless evenings, just looking out at the mountains. "They really had something special, did not they?" Oscar said, coming to stand next to him. "They sure did," Oliver confirmed. "Against all the odds, they found a true love. They showed all of us what was possible." "I just hope I can build a life half as good with my own wife," Oscar said. "That is what we all hope for," Oliver replied. "That is their legacy, is not it? It is not just showing us what love can look like, but making us want to find it for ourselves, to take care of it, and to make it last." The family stayed late into the evening, telling stories about Grace and Owen, their voices mingling with laughter and tears, celebrating 2 lives that were lived so well, and a love that grew from humble roots into something truly extraordinary. As darkness settled and the first stars began to pop out in the huge Montana sky, Emma stood alone on the porch where her grandparents had so often stood. She thought about Grace showing up in a terrible snowstorm all alone and scared. She thought about Owen, waiting in the freezing cold, lonely and filled with uncertainty. She thought about the incredible leap of faith they both took and the beautiful life they built from it. It was a story worth holding on to, worth passing down, and worth trying to live up to. It was a story about courage, hope, and a love that could withstand anything. It was a story that proved once and for all that sometimes the very best parts of life show up when you least expect them. It proved that love can grow in the harshest of winters. And it showed that faith, when you mix it with commitment and care, can truly make miracles happen. A breeze whispered through the pine trees, carrying the faint, clean scent of snow from far away. Emma smiled, feeling the presence of her grandparents in the peaceful night air. They were together once more. She was sure of it, together again wherever they were, just as they had been for 62 years on this earth. And if you listened very, very carefully in the growing darkness, you could almost hear the faint echo of Owen's voice saying, "I have been waiting in the cold for you." And you could hear Grace's reply, "And I came through the storm to find you." It was a love story for all time, one that was born in a blizzard, raised on faith, and destined to last for all eternity. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.